Okay, we're into the mid-70s.
Oh, oh.
In 1976, you acted in the NBC miniseries Captains and the Kings.
Oh yeah,
How
yeah.
did
I
that
know.
go?
I should have. I reached. There's this magazine called Insight that was started by this man called the International Network of Somewhere in Time Enthusiasts. And I wrote. I didn't realize at the time I wrote an account of this whole thing on Captains and Kings, and they published it. And that it was really a ludicrous experience. You want to hear about it?
Yeah.
Oh well, it's kind of Joe Swirling had seen me do a play out here, so he asked me if I wanted to play President Garfield in a scene in Captains and Kings, and I said sure. So I went in and they made me got the costume for me, and then I found out I thought, well, I'd be an office scene. I'd be sitting in the scene. I'd say a couple of lines, and that'd be it, and I'd be out of the place. Then when I got there, we got in a van, and Patty Duke was in it, and this other Blair Brown, I think her name was. We went downtown. I found out it was going to be in the courthouse. It was a gigantic funeral scene in the courthouse, and and they had the makeup woman. Even though I had a beard. And that's why he chose me, because Garfield had a beard. It was not big enough, so he had to put a beard over my beard to make me look more like President Garfield, which I don't think I ever did anyway. And then I went in, and the courthouse was open that day, so it was full of people, and they were all watching, in addition to the cast. And then I found out that I was going to be doing this scene with Richard Jordan, and next to me was Jane Seymour was in it too, but I didn't do anything. There was no scene with her. The trailer next to me had Henry Fonda's name on it, so I thought, oh my Lord, I hope I don't have to, do anything with him. And then it turned out that I was going to have to do the scene where I walked by the casket and looked in, and there would be, the fellow from Combat. Who got killed making the Twilight Zone movie.
Oh, Vic Morrow?
Yeah, and he was lying in the casket with his eyes open, looking at us. So I had to pretend he was dead. And then I would go up to Richard Jordan and give him I shook his hand first for the rehearsal, and extended my sympathy, and then later he took me aside and said, I think being the president, you wouldn't shake my hand. So I said, oh, okay. And then I found out that the senator that I had to do most of my lines to was Henry Fonda. So there I was, and I couldn't find my marks because I'd never done this sort of thing before. So finally they put sandbags down. So when I hit the sandbags, I'd know I had reached the mark. And I hit him too hard, and I tripped and fell forward into Henry Fonda's arms. So it was a completely humiliating moment.
Overall, though, would you do it again? I mean,
No, never. Well, I did. I had 2 words in Somewhere in Time. I enjoy acting. That was just never having done it, having to do a scene with Henry Fonda right off the bat. That was just, and it wasn't even on a set. I've done a lot of plays out here. I find that less daunting, even though you have to remember the lines for the entire show from beginning to end. But it's somehow it's easier than there is a definite technique to film acting, and it takes you years to master it. I didn't really. It doesn't look like it, but when you see what they have to know to do it successfully, you realize that it's no easy chore.
Let's go back to something that you really know about, and that is the craft of writing for television. Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask you some general questions about the craft. The first is, do you have a writing style?
Well, in the beginning, I think we all imitated Ray Bradbury, and then gradually we achieved our own style. I guess I have a style. It's a very this review I just got in Publishers Weekly refers to my less is more style, and it's a very simple declarative style. Just what's happening. I describe what's happening, where they are, and in this book that was published with all my Twilight Zone scripts, the reviewers said that it was enjoyable reading they remembered enjoying the Twilight Zone, but they enjoyed reading the scripts because they could see the whole. I just had enough things in it so they could visualize what was going on. So I don't. My son, my older son Richard, told me years later that when he wrote a script, he did it very descriptive, very ornately, not necessarily for the shooting, but to interest the producer who was reading it. And I realized he was right, that I might have been doing a lot better if I had used novelistic techniques on my stories and presentations and scripts. But it's very simple, very simple. I write in longhand. I don't have a computer. I'll never have a computer. I used to work on the typewriter a long time ago, then I stopped. I prefer writing in longhand and doing so many pages a day, and then I get them typed up.
Do you have a writing schedule of sorts?
Not now, I don't. For years I did. When I was supporting a wife and 4 children, I had a definite schedule. I can remember one period in my life, my wife would get up at 6 in the morning, and I would get up, and she would see a course, an educational course on television and getting the children ready for school, while I'd be working on a novel, and I'd be working on a novel till about noon, and then from noon till God knows when, I would be working on whatever script assignment I had at that time. Eventually my style evolved, or my schedule evolved to maybe 1 to 5 or something like that. And my younger son doesn't work, he can't write for more than an hour or 2 at a time, and yet he has been very successful at it.
Do you outline when you write?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I'm sure I do. When I was at college, I learned how to write term papers. You'd put things on 3x5 file cards, and then you get them in the proper order, and that's how I wrote stories. Very few cards, but novels. There was one novel which I never finished because it was going to be too long. And I had an entire room, I had corkboards on the entire wall, and every one of them was covered with file cards. I had thousands of file cards. You don't, I mean, they keep you on track, but you're not rigidly bound to them. If while you're writing something else occurs to you that's better, you just scrap what you wrote on the file card and do the new idea.
What is your process of rewriting?
My process? Well, I enjoy rewriting. And the hardest part of writing is starting out from scratch with a blank page, or page 1 blank. I read them, I think, with the idea of how would this look, for a script, how would this look to an audience? Is this interesting? Is this too much? Are they talking too much? Is it boring? Now, as I told you, in Duel, I put too much inner thoughts in the script, and they took them out. But rewriting is just a matter of pruning phrases. I prefer in cutting, rather than cutting sentences, cutting words, I'd rather put a big box around a whole section and put an X to it. I find that simpler than trying to meticulously take out 1 word here, 2 words there, a line here. It just, and I don't think it doesn't help the script that much. Better you take out a whole chunk. If it's not absolutely invaluable to the story, people aren't going to miss it anyway.
Do you tend to read the lines out loud yourself or act them out?
Always. I act out every part. Yeah, and when I was doing that picture for Peter Lorre, and they were in, I would imitate them. I could do a reasonable Peter Lorre, but I couldn't. Vincent Price, I think Joe Flaherty was able to do him, but or with John Candy. And that I could do. Basil Rathbone, I used to be able to do Basil Rathbone doing a Tums for the Tummy ad, but and who else? Oh yeah, also in the Comedy of Terrors was Joey Brown, for heaven's sake. I remember he could not. He had very few lines to do, and he couldn't remember them. And Jacques Tourneur was so patient with him. I marveled at his patience. It took him about 25 takes just to get a few lines out. And every time he'd fluff it, he'd just go and say, "It's all right, Joe. It's all right. It's going to work out. Don't worry about it." And was it Billy Wilder who said that Marilyn Monroe had the same problem, and she did about like 80 takes on something, and on the 79th take, he would go up to her and say, "It's all right, Marilyn. Don't worry about it." And she'd say, "Worry about what?"
Do you ever have to do rewrites on the set, or get a call saying we need another line, or does that happen to you a lot?
Well, as I said, the script usually turned out to be too short on so many of these things I did for Corman, and so I'd have to add things afterward, which is not a good thing to do when you've gotten the thing to work exactly right. To bulk it out a little is it's not creatively as valuable.
What techniques and methods have you used to create so much of the suspense and fear in your work?
Well, that's a good question. Movement, constant movement, and distraction. Like there's a David Koepp, who's very good at this. He wrote this picture, Panic Room is out. He directed my novel. He wrote a screenplay for my novel, A Stir of Echoes, and made this picture. And he did this marvelous scene, which was sort of indicated in my book, but not the way he did it, where Kevin Bacon can't sleep because he's been hypnotized and his mind is all agitated. And he goes downstairs and he's looking at the television, and then he goes to get the remote control, and he moves that scene a little bit, picks up the remote control. When he sits back, there's a dead woman sitting on the sofa next to him, and it made you jump out of your skin. And I've done that. Those two things I have done, not exactly what Val did, but like in Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, I had him pull down the shade of the airplane, and then camera moving in infinitely slowly, the thing, and finally he can't stand it and pulls it up, and there's this thing where, and I had producers say, you traumatized me for I wet my pants. You traumatized me for my childhood from that scene, and it's so simple to do. I always wonder why they didn't use it more often. Spielberg did it in Jaws. I think partly because the shark didn't work, but it was a great effect when you finally showed it. It was at a moment that had no fear involved. That's a good thing to do. When you're going to do something scary, have something going on that's totally banal, totally acceptable as a everyday activity, and then suddenly something, he's just throwing this stuff and complaining about this, saying, this, and then this gigantic thing comes out of the water and shocks the hell out of him. And that's a technique too.
Now, so much of your work has to deal with dark forces and the supernatural. Do you personally have beliefs about that?
Yeah, I don't believe in supernatural, though. I believe in supernormal. Yeah, oh, sure. I've had a book published called The Path, which is most of the writings of this metaphysician named Harold Percival. I have a book coming out in a few months called A Primer of Reality, in which I have quotes about metaphysics from all these different sources. I'm very much into that. I did What Dreams Might Come about afterlife. I have a list of 100 books I use for research for that book. And no, I'm very much, but as I said, I don't believe in the supernatural. I don't think anything can be unnatural, to defy nature. I don't believe in miracles. I believe that what seems to be a miracle, we just don't understand why it happened. We don't know the details of what's going on behind the scenes.
You use the word supernormal.
Yeah.
How would you define that? Is that?
Well, it's beyond the norm. It's not against nature. It happens within the confines and the structure of nature, but it is beyond what we live with on a daily basis, beyond the norm of our life and our existence.
Now, has your view on that changed over the years?
Well, I've been reading books on metaphysics and telepathy and parapsychology since I was a teenager. I've got a huge library of them myself. And but it wasn't until, and I realized in looking back through my short stories that I put pieces of it all throughout my work without knowing it. And Story of Echoes, which was published in the '60s, is about life after death, this ghost in his house, and him becoming psychic. And so even back then, I was into it, and I tried for a while to combine genres, which I hate the whole concept of genre writing. I hate the idea that you're in a genre, because, and especially out here, if they think that's your genre, that's it. That's all they'll ever offer you. That's why it was so miraculous, using that word advisedly, that I got to do The Morning After. That was super normal. And but in the Story of Echoes, I decided I wanted to combine a murder story with a ghost story. And there were other things where I wrote a Western novel where I wanted to combine a horror story with a period Western, which I did. And it was something that was generic, indigenous to the time.
Is it hard to sell something out of, quote unquote genre?
I think so. I think so. I mean, I could do it now because they know who I am. But yeah, I think generally speaking, out here, it makes me cringe every time they say, well, it's like it's 4 weddings and a funeral and Dracula combined, where they're always describing a film as 2 other films in tandem with each other, which I think is ludicrous. But what was your question?
Now, you've sort of been called the master of the fantasy.
This review I have a novel coming out, a suspense novel coming out in July, and the review in the Publishers Weekly, which was very good, referred to me as the Hemingway of horror. So the publisher is just falling all over themselves, to get it, to make sure that's on the book when it comes out, And horror is a word that horrifies me. I don't like horror. I never have liked horror. To me, horror is like, gruesome things, monsters that have slime all over them, or things popping out of your stomach, and blood and gru. And one of the scariest pictures I ever saw, they've been showing it a couple of nights on television, is called The Possession of Joel Delaney, and with Shirley MacLaine, and it's frightening. It is so frightening. And yet you never really, except for toward the very end, you never see a thing. And Rosemary's Baby was terrifying, and you never saw anything horrible. You never even saw her baby at the end. And it's just subtlety. So Hemingway of terror, I'd rather be considered, but it doesn't rhyme. You need 2 H's,
What about, the science fiction? I mean, how would you define?
I just backed into science fiction. I never read science fiction when I was a kid. I read fantasy from the time I was a small kid. When I sold this first story, Born a Woman, people said, "Oh, it's a mutant story. It's a science fiction mutant story," and I thought, "Well, what's that?" So because it did so well, it got such a nice recognition, and there were like maybe 40, 50 science fiction magazines being published at the time. I rushed to the library and got a whole ton of science fiction anthologies and read them. so that I could, cash in on this bonanza. But I never really enjoyed science fiction, and I've said before, and it's certainly no slur on him, that they used to refer, maybe they still do, to Ray Bradbury as the greatest science fiction writer in the world, and he's not. He may be and he is one of the greatest writers in the world, but because you set something on another planet doesn't make it science fiction. I did a speech once at the Writers' Conference in which I attacked genres and revealed how I tried to combine genres just to vitiate them. And and I said that you put a love story on Mars, it becomes science fiction. You have a love story here, it's a love story. You have a murder story here, it's a murder story. You put it on Mars, it becomes a science fiction story. And so on. You just take anything and put it on a different planet or in a rocket ship, and all of a sudden they consider it out here science fiction. They have really not done too much with science fiction from beginning to the present. They're still in their monster fixation stage, I would say, primarily.
Where do you think it can go?
Oh, there are so many elements. I mean, when I was talking all these things, parapsychology to me is science. You could make science fiction out of that. Science fiction to me is just science fiction is an extrapolation of science, of what we already know. It's just an extrapolation of it. Fantasy, there's no holes barred. It can be anything. So that you could have any science, sociology, psychology, metaphysics, chemistry, anything. It could be made into science fiction, although it's not considered to be worthy of that now or amenable to that now, but it is.
You've worked as a fiction writer, a screenwriter, and a television writer. Is there any that you prefer?
Well, of course, you would always prefer novels because it's all yours. You work with an editor to a degree, but outside of that, it's all yours. And the movies, like Duel, is a brilliant piece of work, brilliant. And I wrote a very good script, but I can't take the credit. There's Steven's direction, and there's the cameraman, the director of photography, and I remember they had a thing at the Museum of Television about Twilight Zone. Oh no, it was about Duel, and I asked Billy Goldenberg, who I've known for a number of years. I said, I hope this doesn't offend you, but I didn't think the score in Duel was music. Was it? And he said, no, you're right, it wasn't music. He said, Stephen came to me and said, I don't want music in this thing. And it was just very calculated, brilliantly orchestrated noise that went along with the story. There was no love theme from Duel or anything like that. And so I don't know what I was leading up to there, but it's just that the fact that you have to give credit to so many people if you get, the actors, for heaven's sake, Dennis Weaver, Darren McGavin in the Night Stalkers shows, and Dick Van Dyke in The Morning After, and on and on and on, all the actors in the Twilight Zones. So, although it's very nice, it's nice to get credit for these scripts. Only when you have a short story or a novel published is it all yours. Like I have a play, the Omega One, and if it's a big success, I'll have the pleasure of having written the play, but I got to give the director credit, I got to give the producer credit, I got to give the actors credit, the lighting man, the sound man, everything.
What do you think distinguishes a good writer from a bad one?
Well, I would be hard. It seems like I could only tell by reading it. If it seems bad writing is just, I mean, corny is a little corny a word to use, but it's just, when you read it, it's what they're talking about, and what they're, there are all these Harlequin novels, the young woman goes to be the, that does the Jane Eyre bit and meets this handsome man, and they have this wonderful romance. It's the subject matter to begin with will decide if it's really serious subject matter. When William Gibson wrote The Miracle Worker, he had to write it. I mean, he wouldn't have even thought of it if he wasn't a good writer. That's my favorite film, incidentally, The Miracle Worker. And I don't know what to say. I can't really describe what literally makes a bad writer. I'd have to read it and say, oh boy, this stinks. This is terrible, right? This is, what, people don't talk like this. People don't think like this. The way you're describing things is banal and repetitive and derivative. But I'd have to read it first. It's a little hard for me to pin down in words what bad writing is precisely.
That's fair enough. Let's go back to your career. In 1980, you wrote the NBC miniseries The Martian Chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how that came about for you?
Well, originally I was just going to write a few hours of it, and somehow ended up writing the whole thing. And neither Ray or I were too happy with it because of the way it was done. There were some moments in which we thought were absolutely wonderful, but it should have been done. I mean, Dick Berg is a good producer, and what's his name, directed Around the World in 80 Days, for heaven's sake.
Oh, Michael Anderson?
Yeah. It may be that Ray's poetic visions are just too difficult to put on the screen, because they seem realistic when you read them, but when you put them on the screen, they lose that poetry. Like for instance, the first story it was very disappointing. You just try to do it literally, and it doesn't work. I thought the best scene in the whole thing was a completely realistic scene where this minister, played by Fitz Weaver, who has always yearned to have some contact with Jesus, and it goes in this church and hears a dripping sound and looks in this place where they baptize children, I guess, and sees blood drop, and sees Jesus, only it's not Jesus, it's this Martian who has to appear exactly as the people. Is he patting you on the shoulder? Who has to appear, whatever they're thinking of, that's the way he's going to look. And he knows that this preacher has wanted to see him, and it's just exquisitely done. And he finally has to let him go. I mean, as long as he wants to hold on to the Martian, has to stay with him as Jesus. And finally, as much as it breaks his heart, he has to let him go.
Stop there to change the tape.